Greetings, Mark Rang here, publisher of The Sun, and today my guest is George Epstein, our regular guest here, and also our Sun columnist. And George, remind me that you haven't been on for like a month or two. I guess we took an inadvertent vacation.
The summer was so beautiful. As awful as the drought has been, the weather's been pretty spiffy, and being outdoors and doing a lot of stuff. It's been great. Good summer.
Yeah, and fall, actually. It's like this weather's incredible.
Well into it.
You know, except if you don't have a dug well, that is.
Exactly.
So I just wanted to touch upon, David Friedman is our Saturday columnist, syndicated national Pulitzer Prize winner, blah, blah, blah. And when he was on, I asked him about how to be objective, or whether he tries to be objective as a columnist, and I want to ask you that. But what prompted that is someone put a sign in the front door of the Sun, this is months ago in the spring, blah, 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 Friedman sucks, because he's liberal. You know, and in my view, I mean, maybe all journalists have some liberal bias, but in my view, David is least liberal or least subjective, because a lot of it's just historical based.
Yeah.
So how do you, like in today's column, and this is Thursday, and your column's in the paper today, don't miss it. It's a great one as always. But, you know, you kind of take on mostly Trump stuff, but you also pick on Harris, I think, too.
I did.
So how do you, are you a liberal or are you a conservative? Or do you even would venture to say?
I do hate the categories. I think they're odd categories. And I think about conservative being defined as small government kind of person, liberal being more comfortable with big government and more government intervention to make people's lives easier and nicer. But they're so inconsistent. So you look at something like the death penalty, and I know I'm heading off already, but you look at something like the death penalty, which is supported by conservatives and not by liberals. And it utterly mystifies me that someone who considers himself conservative, who doesn't trust big government, would hand over the power of life and death over people and support the death penalty and trust that government will make good decisions about who to kill and who not to kill. It makes no sense to me at all.
I'm glad you bring that up. I'm just going to interject here, because when I have this, rarely have the discussion about death penalties, I say I don't care about the person who's on death row. The reason I'm against this is, why do you want to give government that power?
That's exactly the point I'm making. I think the definitions are very flexible, and they adjust to whatever the two parties want them to be. And the result is you have the two parties dividing our country in a way that's sick, warped, weakens us, hurts us in so many different ways. And I really don't want to be part of either party. And if you choose to categorize yourself as conservative or liberal, you are categorizing yourself as a Democrat or a Republican. And boy, do I not want to be that, either one of those. I'm independent, and my hope is that I can find good answers to the big questions without being tied to one of the two parties.
I mean, is there not a conflict, but it seems as though more people are becoming independent, right? They consider themselves independent, like a third Republicans, third Democrat, and a third independent, which kind of flies in the face of this polarization that's going on. Of, you know, I mean, certainly of elected officials, maybe that's gerrymandering or...
Well, the two parties have made a strategic decision that appears accurate, which is that if you can divide America as best you can between liberal and conservative, Democrat and Republican, and that by attacking your opponent, that's the best technique to getting yourself elected. Neither of the parties have a message to send that's a valid, important, exciting, leadership-oriented kind of a message, and so they don't get elected on the basis of their positions on the issues. They get elected by out-insulting and attacking their opponents. And so I think, yes, the country is very polarized, but more and more people are rejecting the two parties, not just by saying, I don't really want to be a Democrat or Republican, but like me, I hate the two parties. They're evil. They are hurting our country. They're weakening our country by dividing us. And I think that the voters need to reach some critical mass where they just say, we're done. When we have Harris and Trump, or Hillary Clinton and Trump as our choices for who to pick for president, out of 300 million people, boy, they're not serving us very well, are they?
Well, I don't know, and that's I mean, well, yes, I agree with you in some sense, but nobody is ever, you can't imagine anybody being president until they're president. Like, it's just such a high place in life. You know, we don't have statesmen anymore. We don't have the Winston Churchills or the orators.
That's my point, but the parties aren't going to find them, because the parties are going to select people who are most effective in attack mode, because they can't be a Winston Churchill and stand up and say, here are my beliefs, here are my principles, because that's not the way, apparently, to win elections, or at least it hasn't been. You win elections by attacking your opponent, and that's not what statespeople do. And so we need a different way to find our statespeople. Look at the TV show America's Got Talent or American Idol, those kinds of things. You have producers who go out and travel across the country and find these people to compete, and they search for them, and they test them out, and they have them audition, and ultimately they pick a smaller number, and the public votes, and you text in who you want and all that. We devote more energy to reaching out across the country to find the best juggler or magician or singer than we do to find the best potential president. We let the two parties run this process and give us these dregs for choices that we face when we go to the polls.
I mean, it seems like that when you say we, then the question is who's we? I mean, American Idol has producers, right? So we do have a primary system, and we have, you know, and all that people discuss of whether you should have a national primary and a New Hampshire primary and all that. But at the same time, the system, as we know, is that what you end up with the primary system is the more radical on both sides, right? They have to appeal to their bases of their bases. So, you know, in 30 seconds, what's the fix to that? How do you get them back to the middle?
You can't. You have to have an independent, nonpartisan person who goes viral, who appears on television, and people say, oh, that guy makes sense, that woman makes sense, and we are going to get behind that person. And that is potentially what the internet can do for us. It can create celebrity out of nothing. And taking a person who stands before us, gets in front of us, and gives us some good ideas, demonstrates not a culture of attack, but rather a set of principles, a level of integrity. They're all over the place. There are 1 million people. I'm going to make. Well,
you're pretty smart. I don't know if I want you to be president.
You don't think I'd be better than Trump or Kamala Harris? I certainly think you would be better than Trump or Kamala Harris.
Well, thank you.
But it's a low bar.
Oh, okay. I don't want to get my head too big.
Yeah,
with that
no. Please write in, mail him a check.
Yeah, no. I agree with you, because we would just have common sense.
Yeah, and we're not tied to the two-party lines. We don't have to parrot a party line in order to win a nomination. We don't have to take those extreme positions in order to get the base of the party to vote for us. Remember the number of people who actually vote in primaries before the primaries are decided. Remember, it only takes usually a few primaries before the choice is made. You have a handful of Americans, and typically the most extreme Americans, who are making a decision about who the nominees are for the two parties. The primary system's an utter failure. Let the producers of America's Got Talent go find us some people. There are 1 million people in America today who would be better presidents than any of the people we've had in recent years.
That's a good quote. We'll use that in our Saturday quote
Please
machine.
do.
Okay.
All right.
So we'll move on to a really light topic, democracy.
Okay.
So there's a new documentary out, I guess, on one of the streaming services called 2 + 2 = 5. It's a look back at George Orwell, autocrats. It wasn't produced, apparently. It's been a couple of years in the making, so it wasn't necessarily a Trump thing. So, but my thing about Trump, and you know, everybody discusses democracy going away. And the thing about Trump, I think his magic is that he taps into this thing, crime. Nobody wants crime, right? So it's great that we're going to go after crime, but geez, do you really want the military to do it, right? Immigration. He's done a great job shutting the border. Nobody wants illegal immigrants, but do we really want these masked guys picking up, this 40-year-old guy who's been in the country for 20 years and, you know, dropping his kid off at daycare and ends up shot? I mean, do we want to, so there's some autocratic, and then we get to the, free speech. And Kimball's in the one. And I know you want to say a few words about that. And then there's this new thing. Do you see this new thing about this compact with the colleges? So what's her name? Who's the Secretary of Education? The WWE guy.
Right.
Yeah.
McMahon.
McMahon, thank you. His wife.
This is a test. I passed
no,
it.
I know, that's very good. So get this. So now because they went after Harvard and the Penn State and all that. So now there's this thing. I got to read this. Is that if you're going to get these favorable things from the federal government, basically money, unless you can't punish, belittle, or even spark violence against conservative ideas. Can you imagine doing that as an overlay to a college?
I think Charlie Kirk is a great icon of this issue, and his background is fascinating, and the response to the horrible assassination that occurred is bizarre, completely unrelated to him and his ideals and his background. So a couple of things. Charlie Kirk attacked, called MLK, Martin Luther King, awful person, and he was very aggressive in his attacks on Martin Luther King, who was also killed by an assassin's bullet. Charlie Kirk didn't view him as sort of a saintly or anything like that because he'd been shot and killed in a horrible way.
Charlie Kirk also wanted to repeal the Civil Rights Act.
And that was, of course, at the very core of Martin Luther King's legacy was the Civil Rights Act. And Charlie Kirk's young. He doesn't remember a South, as I do, where the bathrooms were labeled black and white, and you couldn't go to hotels and restaurants and so on if you were black, and public accommodations weren't there, and states' rights said we could do that. We were allowed to ban black people from all. So Charlie Kirk was an easy person to disagree with on those particular things, but the response by conservatives of his assassination, you can't say anything bad about Charlie Kirk, is silly in the same way that Charlie Kirk was comfortable saying bad things about Martin Luther King. And Charlie Kirk was not an icon of free speech, for example. His organization, Turning Point, became active by creating watch lists of liberal professors at colleges. That's what the organization did. It created lists of professors who were too left-wing, who were attacked and tried to get them fired from state colleges, and they were doxxed. Their personal information was sent out and all that. And he didn't necessarily do those things, but he created the watch list and made them targets for those.
But he was a big advocate for free speech.
No, he wasn't. He was exactly the opposite. He didn't want liberal left-wing professors to be allowed to be active on college campuses. He attacked that. What his claim to fame was, and he was so successful doing, was he built a business, and Turning Point was based on it, of traveling around from campus to campus, finding left-wing activists on those campuses, and then debating them. And not just debating them randomly, but thoughtfully, respectfully, and he put together a traveling roadshow that was like a traveling rock concert, where large crowds of students would appear at different campuses and watch Charlie Kirk debate the local liberal, and see them go after each other.
Like the Globetrotters.
And like the Globetrotters, yeah, no, it was. They were the generals for the liberals. And it was incredibly effective in getting free speech, that's not the right word, getting ideas out on the table, listening, having a whole bunch of college kids not just listening to one side or the other, but listening to people speaking intelligently and respectfully and thoughtfully about both sides of the issues. And he made millions and millions of dollars doing it. He became wealthy doing it.
He was only 33 or something.
And he was
the prodigy.
And his podcast did the same thing, and they made a pile of money. But he wasn't a free speech advocate. He wasn't someone who believed that because you were assassinated, you should have a free ride and no one should ever criticize you. He was someone who created a new business model of traveling around and putting on these shows that were really very useful, that were very educational. And he deserves a lot of admiration for that. And if you think about it, it's not that radical a thing to do, to actually have debates on campus between people with different viewpoints. He made it into something that wasn't happening, or he demonstrated that it wasn't happening, and that it was something that would attract attention, and that college students would be interested in hearing those thoughts being expressed on college campuses. You got to give him a ton of credit for doing that. But that's different from free speech, which he tried to stamp out. He tried to create a dialogue, is the best way to describe it. And boy, I have a lot of admiration for that. And if we go back to the previous discussion, it's exactly the opposite of what our political parties want. They want to speak by themselves, you know, not face to face with the competition, and they want to just attack their opponents and paint them as evil and negative. And that was not the Charlie Kirk approach to doing that. So I think he does offer a model for the kind of debate that should be occurring on college campuses.
No, that's good. So that's a positive note, even though.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And what do you think about the general, you know, when people complain, I've said this many times, people complain about Trump to me, I say, look at the Democrats. You know, that's why you got Trump. It's because what the Democrats did, for all the reasons we've talked about. But what about this inching towards autocraticness? I mean, I have faith in our system. I mean, Kimmel was taken off, he's back. It's scary, though, these little the chip away.
I think it's worrisome. And we're old enough to remember that Orwellian was an adjective, that George Orwell, who you referred to, created this whole environment in 1984 with Big Brother, and the ability to essentially tell lies effectively. That was what the book 1984 was all about. It was about propaganda. It goes back to the communist propaganda machine and so on. And this is where free speech, freedom of the press, do all come into play, because we do have an environment that is filled with lies, a political environment that's filled with lies. And nobody has produced the sheer volume of made-up nonsense that the current president has, but the previous president came up with a pretty good stream of stuff that was nonsense. And over the years, whether it was Lyndon Johnson declaring we were winning the war in Vietnam, or Nixon, I am not a crook, or I never had sex with that woman, we don't have to say who that was, or there are WMDs in Iraq. Anybody who believes what our presidents tell us is a sap. And I think that's the scariest part. People are not prepared to push back on the words of the people that they voted for. It's cognitive dissonance is something you can study in psychology, that once you've made that commitment in your head, I voted for this particular person, and so I'm sort of obligated to believe whatever he tells me. Boy, we got to break free of that. And that's where true freedom of the press, that's where free speech comes in. And we have a lot of threats to those two things.
It seems like it, you know, and they compare the Kimmel taken off, and conservatives have compared that to Facebook and what Biden did. I guess the Biden administration pressured Facebook to take stuff off on COVID. Right. And I'll say that I'll just say about the paper is that we publish all the letters, except if they're just really, you know, not meeting community standards and that kind, I mean, just basic stuff, except during COVID. And I will say that I didn't spike, I challenged the letters writers when they wrote in on COVID, and they said, you know, the vaccine's killing 10,000 people a year or something. And I'd say, you got to prove that. It's a health issue, I can't do that. So I think, was that what, I guess I'm asking you, is that what, do you know, that's what Biden did to Facebook, the pressure, take that stuff off? Because that's different than Kimmel in my book.
To my knowledge, it was driven primarily by Fauci and the healthcare people, which is the right place for it to come from. Doesn't mean they were right, but it's the right place for it to come from, who said, gee, this is scary stuff, this can kill people. And if I'm Facebook, I have a horrible challenge to try to draw the line on that. Facebook doesn't have the option that you have to contact the letter writer and say, that's terrific that you do that, by the way. I think that's really wonderful. But Facebook is dealing with millions, a billion people, and so on. So I don't have a perfect answer there, but I look at how deeply we've fallen into the black hole of RFK Jr. And his minions, the wackadoodles that he's put into office under him. And I say, they are killing people, and they will kill a lot of people if they're allowed to head down that road. Not directly necessarily, although you kind of wonder about the withdrawal of funding for research. That's still probably indirect. But you can kill people by discouraging people to do what's best for them, what the science shows for them is best for them, what medical science demonstrates to be truthful. But the flip side of that is that the Fauci-driven CDC said stuff that they didn't know to be true. They took best guesses. I think they were well-intentioned, but I'm sure they were well-intentioned. But telling us to wipe down our Amazon packages and leave them, don't touch them for a week, and whatever it was they were telling us, the risk to children was clearly much lower than they were promoting, and so on. And part of that was because they didn't know a lot, right? They were still learning actively, and they were taking the most conservative position, stay away from each other, and
Okay, we're going to move on.
Okay,
because we got 5. Go ahead. One more second on that.
Go ahead.
All right, because I'm going to call this the lightning round.
Okay.
We have 5 minutes to go, believe it or not. Okay, the shutdown. ACA, the 2 parts to that. One, what do you think about the Obamacare, the extra subsidies? And then one of the stories is that Trump is saying, good, shut down the government, now we can finally get rid of some of these excess departments.
I want the government to provide those subsidies. The reason I want it is because I want more people on medical insurance, even if it's paid for in part by me as a taxpayer, because that'll keep the costs of medical insurance for everyone else lower. The costs don't go away. The hospital, the doctor, they still need the money, and so I do want that to stay in place.
Even the increased subsidies, because it started off with had to meet a certain income threshold, and then during COVID, both with Trump and Biden, they increased it.
I want to make sure that people are on medical insurance, and those subsidies are what are needed to get people to sign up and at least contribute somewhat to their medical insurance. I did not like having to pay for people who paid nothing for their medical insurance and to subsidize them through my personal insurance, my business's insurance. That was a cost I shouldn't have had to burden. And so those subsidies help to bring more people onto medical insurance, and they pay at least part of that medical insurance cost.
Okay, what do you think about the shutdown? Do you think it's the Dems' fault? Do you think they should just cave, or do you care?
Everyone loses, and both Democrats and Republicans lose, and as a general rule, government shutdowns convince a large majority of people that the government's better off being shut down on some regular basis. Every year or two, we ought to shut the government down. And then the people who get hurt and the people who suffer in the long term as a result of it, they're a minority of people, and the majority of people don't see in their day-to-day lives a big impact. So it's just a bad thing. It doesn't work to win any votes for anybody, but I do think the Democrats have to pick some things they're going to dig in on and fight for.
ACA is one of them.
And the ACA is the primary
one. And as much as I believe in universal health care, because for a bunch of reasons. But in terms of the government shutdown, any big organization gets fat and happy, and certainly our governments do. So I think it's fine to clean house every 5 or 10 years.
And the question is, how does Trump use this? Does he actually use it as he's threatened, as a means to permanently fire hundreds of thousands of people? If he does it as randomly as Doge did, without any thought or planning, without the impact, the input coming from his cabinet secretaries, which are supposedly the experts in each of those areas, they should be the ones coming and saying, I don't need these 500 people doing this, I don't need 1,000 people doing that. Instead, it just seems completely random. It seems incompetent. And that was what the Biden administration's great failing was. They probably had a lot of good intentions. I think they did have a lot of good intentions, but they were incompetent.
Okay, so then moving on to elections, and we can't go through all of them because we only got 3 minutes left now. But, you know, John Sununu, everything's open. Our Congress seat is open, congressional seat is open, U.S. Senator with Jeanne Shaheen. So we got John Sununu, John E. Sununu, who was our congressman and our U.S. Senator, right? So he pops in. He hasn't declared yet. But there was a new poll that says that he's up over Scott Brown, who has declared for the U.S. primary Senate, and but both are trailing Chris Pappas, who's the congressman who's going to be the Democrat. So John Sununu pops in, right, just say hello. I haven't seen him in 10 years. And I said, John, you're like, it reminded me, and I said this, you're like the Reagan walking into the room. You're the old school Republican, conservative, you know, low deficits and all that. And I said, well, how are you going to conflate that with Trump? And he says, 2 more years. 2 years. In other words, he gets elected in 2026, and Trump only has 2 more years.
Yeah, is he willing to stand up and say anything against Trump? Probably not. His dad and his brother did say some critical things, and so the question is, will he, John E. Sununu, say negative things about Trump in the primary election in order to be able to beat Scott Brown, who's all in with Trump. So I think you have an entertaining race there. Remember John E. Sununu, he ran against an incumbent Republican, something Republicans never do in New Hampshire, and he beat Bob Smith in the primary to get himself nominated and to win his Senate seat. And then when I saw him occasionally as a U.S. Senator, he hated being a U.S. Senator. He doesn't like shaking people's hands. He's not a warm and friendly guy. He didn't do a lot of homework. He didn't look you in the eye. I don't know why he's doing this, except his dad and his brother must have told him.
Yeah, but he was a good, I can remember as a congressman, and you know, I personally like him. I think he's he's a good guy, for sure. He's not Chris, he doesn't have the big giant personality, but when he was a congressman, I always think of him going everywhere. I mean, he'd be at the Crest open house and this and that. So he was a very good constituent service. I'm surprised about the U.S. Senate. So it'll be interesting. I hope he runs. I don't know why they're having polls, even though he hasn't declared yet, but he'd be a good Republican.
He'll win the primary, and he'll give Pappas quite the run. Pappas, in the end, is going to have to take a position on something.
Well, he's Mr. Bipartisan, you know that.
Yeah, right. So that would be an interesting race, as the two of them, as Pappas attempts to pin Sununu as a Trump acolyte, and then and then Sununu tries to paint Pappas as just a weakling, which is the approach that he will take. So it would be an entertaining race.
We have 1 minute left. This happens to be Thursday. Of course, tonight is the deciding game with the Yanks and the Red Sox. And I'm a Yankees fan, and you are too.
I am.
All right, so that's unusual, but.
So did you watch the Yankee Dodger World Series a year ago? That's when I decided I'm no longer interested in Major League Baseball. Sure, it's boring, and sure, it's slow, and sure, it's really hard to watch. That's bad enough. But when these people who are getting paid $10 and $20 and $30 and more million a year can't do the things that little leaguers reliably
run out
do.
the first base.
They don't run the ball out to first base. They don't back up the throw. The pitcher doesn't cover first base. Aaron Judge, spectacular home run hitter, standing there doing his slick little one-handed catch. Ball hits the mitt and bounces right out. They don't care. Why should we care? They don't try hard. They don't do the most basic things. In the first game of the Yankee-Red Sox series, there was a play where the center fielder for the Red Sox is standing there under a ball waiting to catch it, and the nitwit right fielder for the Red Sox comes running across at 100 miles an hour, cuts right in front of him, right? The two of them could have been killed. The two of them together are making $30 or $40 million a year. What Little League coach wouldn't have grabbed the two of them and said, you idiots, you got to talk to each other out on the field. 11-year-olds know how to do that, and these two clowns don't know how to do it. Why would we watch these people so incompetently, boy, I've used that word a lot, so incompetently play the game of baseball? Watch the Little League World Series on ESPN when that's on in August. Record it and watch those kids play. They play smart. They play capably. The coaches have microphones on them. You can hear what they're saying. They know what they're doing. And the kids are trying hard. And they cry when they lose because they care. And the Major League Baseball players, who cares about that?
Are you going to watch it tonight?
Probably.
Oh, okay.
All right,
okay.
I'll leave it
George.
there. A little bit of it anyway.
Okay. Hey, good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Okay, take
Thanks.
care.